the Clines, according to, I got a lot of my information from a woman called Doris Ward, who was a distant cousin that used to live in this part of the country and now lives down in North Carolina. And she has done a fair amount of research, and her daughter has as well. Not only that, but my grandson, Stephen Cook, was just telling me last night that they have been doing some work too and pushed the beginnings farther back still. But what I have is that a man by the name of Peter Cline, born in 1725, was the first identifiable one who came to Upper Canada. Well, actually, not to Upper Canada, but to Maryland and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Because it was still the United States at that time. And they were known as, or they were German-speaking, came from the western edge of what is now Germany. As you know, Germany was not a state at that time, but it was a group of kingdoms. And I think it was Louis XIV was under orders by the Pope to get rid of the Protestant Germans.
Oh.
And so that was one of those great movements that we're now seeing again and again and again, of people being pushed from one place to another. It's funny how they talk about all these refugees, whereas most of us are the sons and daughters of refugees from a number of generations back. At any rate, Peter came to Maryland and Pennsylvania, apparently a place called Harrison. No, I'll spot it here somewhere in my.
Better put the glasses on.
And yes, Hagerstown.
Hagerstown.
And the records that they had were in German, of course, and they belonged to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Hagerstown. They seemed to be church people even back then. And there were baptisms there, and one of the baptisms was for an Adam Cline, who married not Eve, but Susanna, probably Eve's sister. And Adam farmed in that area, in Maryland and the edge of Pennsylvania. It's somewhere here. I have written down the county. Berks County in Bethel Township, which probably doesn't mean anything to you. It doesn't to me. But they were all German speaking. I came on an interesting story not too long ago that there was a time after the American Revolution that they were really seriously considering making German their national language.
Wow.
There were so many German settlers in Pennsylvania and Maryland and the eastern colonies. Again, they had been pushed out of there because of religious wars. The wars between the Protestants and the Roman Catholics in Europe. Anyhow, Adam had a son named Henry, and they trekked back up to Canada after the Revolution. There's some evidence that some of them had been conscripted into the American militia and fought on the wrong side, I'm sorry to say. But they really didn't. They really just wanted to be left alone, not be bothered with these foolish Republicans and all the rest of them. But it was the lure of land, and as it always has been.
Yeah.
And one of the things that brought them to the 13 colonies was the promise of land. And then after the American Revolution, old Governor Simcoe here in Upper Canada was promising 200 acres to people who would come and settle in. He was very anxious to have the country populated before the Americans pushed in and took it over. And so Adam Cline and his brother-in-law Peter Boslaw and other family groupings made their way up to what is now Grimsby. It was called the 40. And they called them by numbers because it was that many miles they measured from the Niagara Falls. And Grimsby, I've never checked it myself, but they thought that it was about 40 miles. And there they acquired land. Now Adam must have had some money because instead of taking the land grant, which was rather poor land north of them, bought land from a man by the name of Nells, Nelles, and settled in at Grimsby. In the meantime, his son Henry had met a young lady who belonged to the Pettit family, and they had been in the country a bit longer and so qualified as United Empire loyalists, and so do we because of that connection. And so if any of you want to apply to get a certificate that you're United Empire loyalists, you would qualify.
Now you have that.
Actually, Barbara and I did. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Barbara's reminded me it's the only inherited title in Canada. So there you are. At any rate, they settled in at the 40, and Adam had several children, one named Henry, Sarah. Henry married Sarah Pettit, and Sarah's father was one of the leading citizens in the Grimsby area. Referred to him as a name I can't think of at the moment, but at any rate, he produced Sarah, and Sarah and Henry had a son named John Pettit, and he was the one who established the place at Clinesville, granted land for a Methodist church there, and farmed that land. And he had a son. They were all stout Methodists, and he had a son whose name was John Wesley, who in turn had a son named Charles Wesley, and so on to the rest of us. So, but it's interesting that it was about 100 years that they had been in the American colonies, and then John Wesley took his family west, and it's 100 years since he did that, and so we're products of all of that movement of the people who were looking for land, looking for a better place to live, and they sons and daughters of John Wesley, who of course married Mary
Quants.
pardon? Quants, that's it. And the Quants were interesting too. They came from Devon, and one of the great secrets that our Uncle Alan kept under his vest was the story that they were originally the products of Spanish sailors who were wrecked on the coast when the Armada came and Drake cleaned them up. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But some of you Steve won't remember because Grandma Cline had died before you were born. But you remember, Fred, that she was very dark. And that was one of the reasons that because of that Spanish ancestry that they claimed. But yes, Audrey says that's where we get the hot Spanish blood from.
The temper.
Yeah.
That's right. So I don't know if there's anything more I need to tell you. They when they moved up from Maryland and Pennsylvania, it was, of course, by covered wagon, I guess, because they trekked up across what is now the state of New York and crossed into Canada at just where Lake Erie empties into the Niagara River, and on down to Lake Ontario. Now there were the three brothers. It was the three brothers, Adam and his brothers John and Peter. Peter, this is the second Peter, and apparently he got sick on the trip and died while they were still on the shores at Buffalo, and said that he wanted to be buried on British soil. So they put him in a casket and shipped him across the river, and he's buried somewhere near Fort Erie. I've never been able to discover just where, but there. But they crossed over there and came on over to the 40. One of my own theories is that probably Adam and maybe John too must have scouted it out before they went back and brought the families up. It doesn't make much sense that a whole raft of people would just come trekking up across the country with no place to go. But they ended up at Grimsby, and then part of the family moved on farther west over south of Hamilton to Binbrook, which our dad used to talk about. They were veterans. Anybody in the between 18 and 60 were expected to serve in the militia, and so there's some record of some of our ancestors fighting in the Queenston Heights battle, and also at Lundy's Lane on the right side. And, they served in the Lincoln. The area at Grimsby was called Lincoln. They served in the Lincoln militia, and also were involved in putting down the rebellion that old Mackenzie tried to leave as well. And of course we had Uncle Dick and Uncle Harvey served in the First World War, and then we know who all was in the second one. So the Clines have been active in that regard as well.